Since he was a child, Patrick had been saving and treating animals, and he knew for sure that in the future he would become a veterinarian. All the neighbours' cats, dogs, and even roosters were constantly under his watchful eye, but the forest dwellers also had enough of his attention. There was not a day without him bringing home some poor toad or squirrel who needed his urgent help. His mother, of course, was not happy about all this, but she liked the fact that her son was growing up as a kind and compassionate boy. Eventually, deciding that a good veterinarian will not remain without work in the village or in the city, she put up with her son's hobby. But Patrick's friend Cheryl did not share his passions. Patrick often brought to her his pets, trying to instill love for beetles or spiders in his girlfriend, but she was only scared. "I want my own farm when I finish studying, but I haven't decided what kind of animals I will breed. When we get married, you will have to help me, so you better get used to it right away," smartly reasoned Patrick. Cheryl only snorted in response. They had decided to get married when they were 10 years old, but right now she was not planning to spend her life in the countryside with cows and horses. The girl dreamed of life in a big city, her own car, and expensive fashionable stores. Years went by. Patrick graduated from the veterinary school, served in the army, and returned to his native village to work as a veterinarian, while Cheryl was studying to become a teacher. During her studies in the city, the girl became very unused to village life and to Patrick, who was just a good friend to her. The girl did not come home often, and Patrick was too decent to impose, but he remembered his promise firmly and just quietly prepared for the upcoming wedding. Cheryl, on the other hand, thought more and more often that they were not a couple. During her studies, she had seen too many guys from the city, and she began to think that Patrick was too simple for her. She finally realized this when she met Brandon, the opposite of her childhood friend. Unlike Patrick, saving up on everything to save money for the wedding, Brandon was generous and could afford to take the girl to a club or restaurant. In addition, Brandon was handsome and seemed very intelligent and well-rounded to Cheryl. The girl was madly entertained by him, not like by Patrick, who was only talking about cows, sheep, and their diseases. So Cheryl, who was dreaming of a beautiful life, began to think seriously about how she could avoid marriage without hurting Patrick. "Daughter, come to your senses. Have you thought about Patrick? He loves you," wailed her mother when Cheryl informed her that there would be no wedding. "Nothing. He'll fall out of love. I have to think about myself. I want to live decently in the city, not in a barn with animals and with Patrick. I won't have any normal future." "But how do we tell him? After all, everything is ready for the wedding." But Cheryl did not care much about her fiancé's feelings, because in her mind she was already on the trip that Brandon had promised her. She quickly packed her bags and left with him to the sea, absolutely not worried about what would happen after her escaping. She did not see how worried her mother was, making excuses to the neighbours and relatives, and did not know how Patrick had withdrawn into himself and almost become a heavy drinker. She was in love, and she refused to notice how her actions were breaking other people's hearts. 6 months later, Cheryl married Brandon and never appeared in the village again. But the girl's life did not turn out the way she had imagined in her rosy dreams. Soon after the wedding, she found out that Brandon was a gambler, and the money that he used to win her heart was won by him at the casino. An ordinary manager in a small company could not afford to live the high life. As long as he was lucky in the game, he threw money left and right, but when luck turned away from him, Cheryl had to deal with an entirely different Brandon, angry and irritable. Accustomed to living the high life, Brandon snapped at Cheryl at the first difficulties and rebuked her for any expense. And this, despite the fact that Cheryl was working and their family budget often consisted only of her salary. Gradually, Cheryl felt more and more disappointed. She often thought of Patrick and she sighed heavily. Cheryl heard that her faithful friend had long ago left the village, married and become a father, and the girl was very bitter at those thoughts. Cheryl couldn't share her frustrations with her mother, so the only person she could talk to heart was her friend Virginia. She always willingly listened to Cheryl and expressed her sympathy, but if Cheryl had been more attentive, she would have noticed her insincerity. Virginia, a gorgeous single blonde, enjoyed Cheryl and her husband's company and joined them not only at their home, but also on picnics, birthdays and other holidays. At first, Cheryl and Virginia were working together in the daycare centre, but then Cheryl went to work at the orphanage. The family constantly lacked money, so Cheryl had to take more and more extra shifts at night, and she used to come home tired in the mornings, like Brandon after another night spent at the casino. On that fateful morning, Brandon was not at home, though the bed was not made. Cheryl decided that he had left before she got home. Adjusting the pillow, she noticed a long blonde hair on it, just like Virginia's. At first, she thought the hair was in the bed accidentally, but seeing a lipstick mark on the edge of the pillow, Cheryl was almost sure that in her absence, Virginia had visited her husband. Suspecting Brandon on cheating, Cheryl had not been able to sleep that morning. Thinking things over carefully, she left the house, bought a portable camera at the nearest electronics store, and installed it in the bedroom. She knew that Brandon had no competitors in the skill of lying, and he would certainly think of ways to justify himself. So she wanted to see everything with her own eyes. After telling her husband on the phone that she had to go to her mum's house for a couple of days, Cheryl turned on the camera and left. When she returned 2 days later, she immediately rushed to watch the video from the camera. Her premonition did not deceive her. Cheryl felt disgusted by what she saw. She quickly gathered her things and, without waiting for her husband to return, left the apartment. "Cheryl, where are you? Brandon and I are worried." Cheryl heard the worried voice of Virginia, who called her a couple of hours later. "You must have been robbed. All your things are gone." "No, it's just that I've left Brandon. The apartment is vacant, and don't call me again. I know all about you," answered Cheryl sharply and hung up. She rented an apartment and filed for divorce. Her soul was empty and only thought that she had once exchanged so foolishly loyal, sincere Patrick for wretch Brendan did not give her any peace. One day, a 4-year-old boy named Tommy was brought to the orphanage where Cheryl was working. He amazingly resembled Patrick in his childhood, and in addition, by some strange coincidence, he had the same last name. The boy was very frightened, but Cheryl hurried to calm him down. She took him by the hand and led him to meet the other children. "And your daddy's name?" she could not resist asking on the way to the playroom. "Patrick," the little boy answered quietly. "And where's your daddy now?" asked Cheryl, and her heart clenched, fearing the possibility that Patrick may have passed away. But it turned out that his father was under investigation. Hearing this, Cheryl immediately went to the village to find out what happened to her former fiancé. There, she was told he had recently been arrested because he had run over a man to death. Cheryl couldn't believe it. Patrick, that sweet and awkward boy from her childhood didn't fit the role of a vicious racer. Where is Tommy's mother? Why was he sent to the orphanage? Cheryl asked Mrs. Ramirez, Patrick's neighbour. Yeah, she ran away with her lover as soon as Patrick had been arrested, and Patrick's mother died last year, and there was no one to leave the child with. So they sent him to an orphanage. Mrs. Ramirez sighed. And by the way, Patrick's wife didn't take care of the child much before. He was the only one who took care of Tommy. Mrs. Ramirez also told Cheryl how it really was. It turns out that Patrick wasn't even driving when the accident had happened. His wife loved to party, to have fun, and on one of the days she failed to control her car on the way back from another party. When she called him weeping, Patrick was in the village and asked Mrs. Ramirez's son Bob to give him a lift to the crash site and rushed to save his wife. There were no witnesses to the accident, and when Patrick arrived at the place, he himself got behind the wheel and called the police, taking the blame himself, and took Bob's word that he would keep quiet. After listening to Mrs. Ramirez, Cheryl immediately realized that she was telling the truth. It was so much like Patrick to save even those who didn't deserve it at all. But Cheryl wasn't going to stand for such injustice and leave things as they were. She decided to talk to Bob and persuade him to testify truthfully to save Patrick from prison. Bob, understand. It would have been fine if his wife had stayed at home with her son and waited for Patrick from prison, but she ran away with her lover. For what should Patrick suffer and Tommy grow up in an orphanage? Cheryl had such a gaze that Bob immediately realized that she wouldn't stop at anything to prove Patrick's innocence. After agreeing with Bob, Cheryl hurried back to the orphanage and after talking to the director, got permission to take Tommy to her home. The director was aware of her fight for the boy's father, so he wished her good luck in restoring justice. The next morning, Cheryl went to Patrick to persuade him to retract his original testimony. Looking into her childhood friend's eyes for the first time in years, Cheryl suddenly realized that she had missed him very much all this time. "Cheryl, is that you? Why have you come?" he asked in surprise. There was no dislike at all in his voice, but only weariness and annoyance that after so many years they had met in such an unpleasant place. "Patrick, I apologize for everything I've done. Believe me, I'm very sorry. I don't know if you can forgive me, but know that I will fight for you. Tommy is at my mum's right now, and I will do everything I can to get you to see each other sooner and never part again. I know the truth." "Cheryl, you don't have to," but the woman interrupted him. "You must agree to act. Your wife has abandoned you and your son, and neither you nor he deserves to suffer because of such a woman. Think, if not about yourself, then about your son. It will be bad for him without you. You may not forgive me, but promise me that you will not leave your son." "Okay, I agree to make an appeal. Are you sure it will be accepted?" "Let them try not to. With Bob's testimony, I'm confident of success." Soon the case was sent for review, and the lawyer was able to obtain an acquittal for Patrick. Once free, the first people Patrick saw were Cheryl and Tommy, who was pressing himself against the woman and trustingly holding her hand. There was so much love and tenderness in Cheryl's eyes that when she rushed toward Patrick, without hesitation, enclosed her in his arms and pressed her tightly to his heart. "You are my saviour. Let's forget everything that came before, shall we? And if you don't mind, let's start all over again." Cheryl cried softly on Patrick's chest, and Tommy, though he didn't really understand what was going on, was also glad to see that Daddy was now with him again. They all returned to the village together and settled in Patrick's parents' house. After his wife's arrest, Patrick divorced her and immediately proposed to Cheryl. The wedding, which the village had been waiting for several years, finally happened. My love, how could I not understand then that you are my happiness? But now we'll never part, and we'll all live together. But not the 3 of us, but the 4 of us, Cheryl said and smiled slyly. You're going to be a daddy soon. I'm pregnant. Honey, how happy I am, exclaimed Patrick and held his wife tightly to him. Finally, they would have everything they had dreamed of and had going on for so long.